Great. All right, so here we go. Let's just jump right in. Like I said, we've got plenty of material to cover here. Let's see. Okay, so very quickly, TSCC, for those of you who may not be familiar, some of you who are brand new, we have been around for over 100 years. We were created by the legislature to focus in on Multnomah County local governments, and we act as a support organization reviewing budgets, taxes, and debt for Multnomah County taxing districts. We have those four major areas we focus on: advocacy, training, providing information, and reviewing. The things that are going to be most pertinent to you today is this budget law training that we do on an annual basis. And then the review, we play a part in the legal budget process. So we will talk a little bit more about what TSCC certification looks like. TSCC budget review is a legally mandated part of the process for all of our TSCC member districts. So you may be wondering, who are those TSCC member districts? And is my taxing district one of those? So we have all the 13 larger districts. Larger just mean any district that serves over 200,000 in population. And then we have 23 smaller districts serving under 200,000 in population. So almost all of the taxing districts in Multnomah County are TSCC members. And the smaller ones, I wish we could fit them all on the slide. I have tried. The font gets teeny tiny. So if you are curious for your specific organization and you don't know, feel free to stay on afterwards and ask us, and we're happy to chat with you. All right, so we're going to jump right in. We're going to start with a budget process overview before we get into the different stages of the budget process. For those of you who are a little bit newer, or just a reminder for those of us who have been doing this for a while, we have a framework for how to do our local government budgets here in Oregon, because the state legislature has created laws and administrative rules that create a standard way to budget. There are multiple reasons for this. One of those being that it provides consistency and transparency for the public to understand how the work is being done. It also is how you set legal spending limits. Doing the budget process is what gives you the authority to spend your money and have that budget resolution that guides the work that you do. So very important that we work through this process and do all of the required parts. You will notice that there is public input required. Even if members of the public do not end up engaging, you need to hold space and make sure they have the opportunity. And we'll talk about what those look like. Budget law also is quite concerned with making sure that you are showing how you got to the estimates and forecasts and things like that. Like, you can't provide a very super high level budget and just say, give me $10 million. We have to have line item detail. We have to have certain organizational structure to our budget to show that work for why you're spending tax dollars the way that you are. And again, we'll have our little roadblocks as we go throughout. So when I had mentioned that there is law and there are administrative rules in how we do our budget, this is the link to both of those. This PowerPoint was sent out to you ahead of time. We will also be uploading it onto our website. I made a few tiny changes over the weekend while working on this. So if you had printed them out, just know a few slides might be out of order. We'll get this most recent version uploaded to the website for you, but most of the content is the same. So feel free to read all of the ORS and administrative rules. We at TSCC, this is what we always go back to understand exactly what is codified in law. However, it is a lot and it can be very dense. So if you are feeling stuck or you're not quite sure where to start, I would suggest maybe looking at some of the manuals and resources that are available. And because this is a budget law refresher, we will show you quite a few of the resources that TSCC has available on our training website. So if you don't absorb everything right here or remember everything, just remember you can go to our training website and there are quite a few help aids to give you assistance. Department of Revenue also has a wonderful local budget law manual for those of you who said that this is your very first year doing anything budget related. A great place to just actually read through that document. It is quite long, but it does give you step by step through the process. Our TSCC budget manual is specific for Multnomah County districts, also can be very valuable. And Department of Revenue has created a number of forms that you can use for various parts of the process. So just know there is a lot of assistance. And for those of you who've been doing this for many years, hopefully you're already all aware of these resources, but this is your annual reminder that this is a great first place to go. And you're like, I know there's something about that, but I just don't quite remember. This is a great place to head. So, why to follow budget law? I've had this slide in my training for a number of years now, but I can tell you honestly, after having worked with so many local government finance professionals, people follow budget law because they want to do it right. They want to do a good job and be accountable to the public. So I don't really feel like we need to tell you that there are civil penalties as well, but it is in here. And it can be very helpful to know this if you have, for example, maybe a budget committee member or a public official who isn't as familiar and it's like, why do we have to do this? You can let them know not only is it the right thing to do, but also there are civil penalties if budget law is not followed. If you don't follow budget law, you legally cannot expend that money and can be liable. I do like to reassure people, however, this is in the case of wanton and willful neglect. So if you have a governing board member or budget committee member who says, I do not want to hold a hearing. I do not want to give the public the opportunity to make choices on this budget. We're just doing it as is. That is an example of, wanton and willful neglect. They know they're supposed to do it. They're choosing not to do it. Accidental errors happen all the time. And so I want to reassure you that usually it's something that we can fix in some way or another. And even if we can't, if it's an honest error, you're not going to need to worry about these civil penalties. We'll just do the best we can to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. All right, so a little bit about the stages of the budget and who is going to be creating budget. There are three essential groups that are involved. The proposed budget is prepared and proposed by staff. We then have an approved budget phase where the budget committee does their good work, and we'll get into more of that. And then we have the adopted budget is done by the governing board. So we have these different phases and different folks being able to put in their perspectives, their knowledge, their information through the budget process. Now, the slides are not always going forward. Okay, here we go. This is a new slide that I put in. These are all the legally required steps for the budget process per Oregon budget law. I think it's nice to have it on one page. It doesn't feel as overwhelming. It's like, oh, we just do these steps and we get through it. And then we have a budget, right? You can also have more than these steps. There's nothing stopping you from having more community involvement, having more preparation and forecasting on the front end. All of that is great. We are talking today specifically about what is legally required. Please do go and above and beyond if that's something that your organization does. We want to do the best that we can for taxpayers with their dollars, and having a solid budget process is a huge part of that. Timeline wise, this is generally what we see for when work is done. Depending on the size and needs of your organization, you may start earlier. You might start forecasting in the fall. Again, nothing wrong with that. You know your organization. Budget law does give us a prescriptive path to follow. However, is flexibility. There is acknowledgement that not all districts are the same, right? So something that I commonly hear is, well, we have a requested budget phase before we even get to the proposed budget. Great. That is absolutely fine to have more internal processes and decision making that is done before the proposed budget is released. Nothing wrong with that. Again, we are just focusing on what is in budget law. So all of this work, one of the most important things is that it must be done by July 1. So you may sometimes get pushback from folks to say, well, we need more time. Can't we just push it back another couple of weeks? It is extremely important that we have everything done by July 1. You cannot adopt a budget after that. So keeping that deadline in mind is so important when building out your budget process and what it's going to look like. And then we do have a note on here that the budget process never really stops, because as soon as you have that budget done, there may be changes. So then you're going to be monitoring and changing your budget if needed. All right, so next I've got a short little video for you, and this is something that was put together by the city of Hillsborough. The reason why I like to show it is because it is created for the public to show what the budget process looks like. So a lot of the terms and phases that we're going to be talking about are in this slide, and it might help give you some ideas when you're thinking about communicating with members of the public or budget committees for you as well. All right, if you can't hear it, please put something in the chat so I know that it's not working.
What is a budget? A budget is a plan to use existing resources and new money that comes in on specific projects, activities, and equipment. By law, the city's budget must balance, with money coming in equaling money going out. Expenditures cannot exceed resources in the budget. The operating and capital budgets are two key components that make up the city's budget. The city's operating budget is like your regular household bills, including groceries, utilities, and gas. The city's actual operating budget consists of routine operating and public services, such as public safety, community services, and public utilities. The capital budget is similar to your major life expenses, like buying a home or a vehicle. The city's capital budget is composed of large expenses like infrastructure, vehicles, water and sewer main replacement, and upgrades to or construction of buildings and roads. The city's main sources of revenue are property taxes and utility fees. Hillsborough's budget process. During budget preparation, each city department prepares and submits their department budget and updates their planned spending needs. Budgets for each department are then reviewed by the city's executive staff, and a proposed budget is prepared for the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee is made up of the 7 Hillsborough City Council members, as well as 7 appointed members of the community. The Budget Committee then reviews the proposed budget during a public meeting, where public comment is also considered. The Budget Committee will then vote to approve the proposed budget as is, or with any additions or deletions. Once approved, it will move on to the City Council for the final step. The approved budget is presented during a public hearing, where the City Council considers community feedback on the budget. The City Council then votes to adopt the budget either as is or with any additions or deletions within certain budget law parameters. After adoption, the budget is reviewed and amended by the City Council on an ongoing basis. The city adopts a biennial budget, which goes into effect on July 1st and ends June 30th of the second calendar year. So why does the budget matter? Beyond the legal requirements, the adopted budget works as a roadmap for the city to deliver essential services and infrastructure in alignment with City Council goals and community needs. It also formalizes the city's commitment to maintain a resilient financial position to be able to continue to preserve and enhance its services to the community.
Okay, great. So, as I said, that video does a really nice job of covering at a high level. And hearing the description of the city of Hillsborough budget process, you may be thinking, well, that looks a little bit different than ours. We've got these, extra meetings that we do and these other things. Again, that's completely fine. We're talking today about those legally required pieces that absolutely must be part of it. So, speaking of that, let's get started on preparing for the budget. The very first steps you likely at this stage in time have already done. Although if you're a smaller district, maybe you're just getting started on this. Both ways are fine. But legally, you must appoint a budget officer. And although it is not in law, I will just tell you, you need to create a budget calendar because that is the only way to ensure you're going to hit all these legally required landmarks and make sure that you are done by that drop dead July 1st date, right? So in terms of appointing a budget officer, you have a couple of options. This is one of those pieces I think that's good to highlight in the refresher. You may be thinking, well, we've never appointed a budget officer, but we have one, and that likely is just fine. You can either do it annually every year. You can have the board or governing body appoint a budget officer, or you can have it in your governing documents. So it might be in your administrative policies or in a charter or something like that. That's fine as well. Just indicating, the budget officer is the budget director, for example, or the budget officer is the city manager. That is completely fine. It just needs to be officially appointed in one of those two ways. And again, we are happy to look over budget calendars for you or drafts to help make sure you do have all those legally compliant pieces. This is an example from Department of Revenue, their calendar that they've put together. The reason that I like it is that they even have the ORS citations explaining, okay, this is that legally required thing, and this is when we were doing that legally required thing. So might be worth updating your calendar to follow a similar format. Again, really helps as a communication tool with your staff, with your governing body, with your budget committee. This is why we are doing the things that we are doing, because this is how it is legally required in law. All right, speaking of budget committees, some of you who are working for those large organizations that we talked about serve over 200,000 folks may be thinking, what budget committee? We don't have a budget committee. So in Oregon law, it's very clear that there is a budget committee. However, if you are a large district in Multnomah County, your governing body serves as your budget committee. So they basically shepherd the budget through two different phases of the process. They approve the budget, and then they also adopt the budget. For everyone else in Oregon, they are having, just like we saw in the City of Hillsborough video, governing body plus an equal number of registered voters to serve in that budget committee. There are some ORS that give us guidelines on things about who can be budget committee members. You can't have a staff member, for example, be on your budget committee. They can't be officers the of the organization. They need to be community members who don't have a voting authority. Um, and school districts also in recent years were given some additional pieces about their budget committees. So school districts now have to have budget committees that have at least one vacancy with a member of the Educational Equity Advisory Committee. I think this passed in, about 2022 or something like that. A roadblock here, a very frequent question we get is, we have advertised in the paper, we have been talking to people, we have it on our website, we are begging for a community member for our budget committee, but we don't have enough. We needed 5, we only have 4 volunteers. That does happen, and the law actually does allow for that and says move forward with the number that you do have. So a question we receive is, we did all of this hard work trying to get budget committee members and we got 0. That can sometimes happen. If that is the situation, your governing board would move forward acting as the budget committee, even though you're a smaller district. But that is very rare, I would say. Generally speaking, you can at least get a few budget committee members if you get some work out there. And if you want to discuss options for recruiting and things like that, we'd be happy to chat. Okay, so moving right along, we have done our budget preparation. Our little green car moves along into the proposed budget, our first legally required budget phase. So as I'm going through this, there's going to be a few terms here, and that I think can sometimes be helpful to when you're communicating with the public, especially because from the general public perspective, things like resources and revenues may sound like the same thing. Same with like requirements and expenditures. However, these have specific definitions in budget law because they have laws attached to them, right? Like when we're making changes to expenditures in a fund, there are certain tasks that we need to do, which we'll get to later, right? So what are expenditures? Really helpful for us to know. So this is just kind of a, high level reminder on that. Like those expenditures are really the things that are going to go out the door, money that is actually spent, where requirements might be something like a transfer, where you're moving money from one place to another, but you're not actually spending it. So therefore it's not an expenditure. So this is here for your reference. We won't go into too much detail. And now we have our first pop quiz. So in true pop quiz fashion, these sometimes will be, directly related to the content we just talked about. Sometimes they will go back a couple of slides. And sometimes, like this one, I know we haven't talked about this yet. So for those of you who are brand new, just do your best. For folks who have experience, you may already be looking at this and saying, I know exactly what it is. And if you're not sure, what a great opportunity to learn. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and launch this one. Just do your best. People cannot see your answers. It's just all aggregated. So don't be shy. Take your best guess if you're not sure. All right, we're seeing quite a few answers on this one. We've almost got everybody. If you haven't had a chance to put it in yet, it's not too late. Go ahead. So we're asking what is required, and I'm meaning in the legal sense, what is required as part of your published proposed budget? We've got budget message, budget detail sheets, salary schedules, or all of the above. All right. So the tricky word here is what is required as your published proposed document. So quite a few you got this right. A few of you did the all of the above, which was kind of our trick question in there, because salary schedules are not required as a published part of your budget. Having that information available in case the public wants it, yes, that is required, but you don't have to publish it. So technically, the proposed budget, all that is required legally is the budget message and the budget detail sheets. This is in no way to say don't do more of those things. If you have additional information, I think it makes a lot of sense to put the salary information in there because that way you don't have to wait for a member of the public to request it. It can just be there and available. So nothing wrong with having that in there, but from a legally required standpoint, budget message, budget detail sheets. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about what those look like. The budget message law tells us specifically what needs to be included in that. So, at a minimum, these are the pieces that need to be put together, and it needs to be presented to the budget committee along with the budget document at that first budget committee meeting. Or if your budget committee is just the governing body, it's the same thing, right? When you are proposing the budget, you need to include this budget message. Now, a common question that we get, I should probably make this one actually a little roadblock, is okay, we've written our budget message. It's fantastic. Do I have to verbatim read it to, into the public record? It's 4 pages and it takes a really long time. So you do not technically have to. You need to make sure that everyone has a copy of that full budget message, including it's available on the website for the public, your budget committee members have it, but it is okay to, for example, maybe have a PowerPoint presentation that summarizes pieces of it, but you're not reading it verbatim. However, some districts feel a lot more comfortable just reading the whole thing and just, to the letter, making sure that it is communicated that way. Nothing wrong with that either. I just want you to know that you do have options. All right, so proposed budget detail sheets. When we talk about the detail sheets, what is that? That is just referring to the numbers that make up your budget, the line items that all roll up to organizational categories. So there are specifics in budget law about how much history needs to be included to provide content or context. That's our transparency piece, right? So you're always going to have 2 years of actuals, and these should match your audited financial numbers. This is something that we see very commonly is errors in the actuals. We see it all the time. A formula error, a line gets added off, and I think it just doesn't get paid enough attention because, we're focusing on the budget. So make sure you double check your actuals. They should be matching those audited numbers and they absolutely should be balancing. All right, and then we have another column in here. This one, tricky, because in the Department of Revenue form, which I'll show you a peek at next, it says adopted budget. However, if you attend the Department of Revenue trainings or look in their budget handbook, what they really mean is the revised budget because they mean the adopted budget with any post-adoption changes. So that can be confusing, but that column right there is the most up-to-date information you have on your budget. So if you did a supplemental budget in September, when you are rolling out your proposed budget, that supplemental is included in your revised budget column right there. And then, of course, the proposed budget numbers. And as you move through the cycle, you just keep filling out those columns. When you get to the end for your adopted budget, you'll have all three showing the process and any changes that happened. All right, as I said, this is the Department of Revenue form. If you are a smaller district, this very well may be what you use. You do not have to use this, but all of the information and the organization structure that they need, you do need to be using for consistency. But if you have your own budget software, that's absolutely fine to be generating your own sets of forms. All right, so when we talk about organizing our budget, one of the key aspects of building budgets here in Oregon budget law is that we must budget by fund and budgets must be balanced at a fund level. So every district is going to have at least one fund. And maybe you only have one fund, in which case it's going to be your general fund, because that's the one that everybody does have. Funds are typically defined by the type of revenue that they receive. So general fund is where your unrestricted property tax money goes. It can go for whatever, right? But let's say you have a grant and it can only be spent on specific things, then you might have a special revenue fund in order to be tracking that information and reporting back for grant requirements. You want to have enough different kinds of funds to clearly show what services and programs you are doing and how you're paying for your expenditures. Now, I have up there the ORS and the administrative rules that have more detail on these funds. Definitely say to take a look because I will say roadblock wise, funds can be confusing for folks. We get a lot of questions around this, like, well, do I have to have a separate fund for this one or do I not? And it is a little bit of an art sometimes because you want to make sure that you have enough to communicate what you're doing without overcomplicating. So if you're a relatively small organization and you have 25 funds, is that really necessary? Could you maybe convey and share that information about programs within a fund instead, right? This is something we'd be happy to consult with you on. This is something we regularly talk to folks about. We can share with you what we're seeing other agencies do and share best practices. All right, well, I mentioned this already. I will mention it again. Resources and requirements must balance in each fund. And for those of you who are newer, when I've been referencing things like resources and requirements and you're wondering what I'm talking about, here are some example here, right here. Our requirements are categorized in law by specific categories. Resources can be called different things, but they're generally going to be in these types of buckets that we see here. Another little roadblock, I should add a little traffic cone to the slide because we sometimes see negative resource amounts. The law is very clear. It says you cannot have negative resource amounts. So, for example, if you have a fee, but then you have a discount program, it may be tempted to say, okay, here's my revenue from my fee, but then negative discount. No, you're just going to budget your net total amount for that, the money that's actually going to show up. If you need to track those discounts amounts, absolutely do it on a separate spreadsheet. It's just not going to be in your budget document because you can't have negative resource amounts. All right. So, as we had talked about earlier, in terms of budget terms, knowing what an expenditure is in law is very helpful. So, please use this as a reference. We're not going to go into too much detail, but that object classification column are those object classifications as defined by law. Your line items, that matches your chart of accounts, might look quite different than what's here. That's okay. It's the object classification that you're going to roll up to. And schools and community colleges have different options. So for schools, you're actually a chart of account that is statewide. And so you're going to be using that. All right, pop quiz time. Let me pull this up here. So this one, we're going to talk a little bit about, again, a slide that was back just a little ways here, where we're talking about what are expenditures versus what are requirements. So let's see if that's snuck into your brains. And if not, that is okay. This is going to be your opportunity to learn. So we've got actually two questions showing up here for the poll. You may have to scroll down just a little bit to get to number two. Oh my gosh, you guys are paying attention to this. I am awesome, awesome work. So I am seeing, which of the following are expenditures, and people are correctly marking materials and services and capital outlay, but not ending fund balance. Ending fund balance is not an expenditure because that's not money we're spending out the door, right? We're not going to spend it in this year. We're saving it for a future year. And then when we're looking at requirements, well, all of them are requirements, right? Because our expenditures are all requirements. It rolls up to that larger category. So each one of these is a requirement, but contingency would not be an expenditure because contingency is holding funds that you may or may not spend in that year. They're not going out the door. All right, great work on that one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move into our next slide here. Again, the proposed budget and just the work that's done and all the pieces that go into that are much longer in our comprehensive training. But there are a few things I just wanted to touch on so that it's in your brain to think about as you go through this refresher course. So one of those is estimating property taxes. Property taxes are a key source of revenue for almost all of our districts. It's very important. And like any forecasting, it can sometimes be a little bit challenging, right? Property taxes are based on our assessed value. However, we have an extra complex system here in the state of Oregon where we also have some constitutional limits that say you cannot charge more than this amount of real market value. So for every property, there's multiple calculations happening to figure out how much property tax you will actually receive. So that limit that I mentioned is that compression loss you see in the formula there for rate-based levies. Not all of you who are on this call are necessarily going to have to be estimating property taxes. But I do think it's very important to just have a general sense of the different factors that are involved. So take a look at these formulas so that you're familiar because property taxes impact all of us, whether it is part of our job or, the fact that we live and either pay it through our mortgage or pay it through our rent, right? So it's something that we do care about and having some understanding, I think, is very valuable. Over on the left-hand side are some of the three large tax levy types that we have here in Oregon. Almost everybody has a permanent levy, although not necessarily. And then local option levy and general obligation bonds are two pieces that need to be approved by voters and are only for certain periods of time. All right. As I said, we could really spend like an hour and a half, probably 2 hours just talking about property taxes, but unfortunately we do need to move through. So I'm going to focus on talking to you about resources. If you are one of those people who is doing the estimates, we do create calculators for any of our TSCC member districts that has historical data to help you identify trends as you're looking at how to budget and do that math on how much money you're going to receive for your property taxes. If you do not receive that in your organization and you would like to reach out to us and let us know. We also have a GeoBond fund calculator. So if you have a new GeoBond that has a general obligation bond that has passed recently, or you're just not really sure if you're estimating it right, please look at this. I'm happy to sit down with you and go over it because this is one area where we see a lot of errors. It can be challenging, right? So for those of you doing the calculations, these are numbers that can be very helpful for you, is knowing generally what that, constitutional spending limit is doing, that compression loss that we were talking about. And then collection rate. One of the other very important pieces in calculating our taxes is figuring out how much you're actually going to get of what you ask for. Because you can tell the assessor, this is how much I need. The assessor will go ask for that, 100% of it. But we have discounts in Oregon for paying early. There are sometimes people who just can't pay their taxes. So you're never going to get 100% of the tax levied. You have to look at the collection rate. And the average collection rate for the past 10 years has been 95.7%. So information for those of you doing that piece of your budget. And this I just threw in here this year because compression has gone up considerably. And the last year, there are several different reasons for that. One of the large ones being that real market value for commercial properties has absolutely tanked in Multnomah County, primarily due to downtown core properties. So, because the real market value is where the spending limits are set, as that goes down, more people go into compression and then more tax dollars are essentially lost. Again, we could spend a lot of time on this, and I actually would love to. I think it's all fascinating. But for our refresher course, on we go. One last property tax thing that I did want to mention to you all, because again, this is a place that we see a lot of errors, is just being very careful when you are estimating your general obligation bond debt service. One of the errors that we often see is that people collect way more tax than they actually need. Having a little bit of buffer, perfectly fine, because we don't know perfectly how much you're going to get, right? Although you can get very, very close because you know how much you need for debt service. But if year after year you're building up a very large fund balance, that is something that we will come talk to you about. And members of the community as well, our commissioners will be looking at that to say, you're just holding on to this taxpayer money. Why are you not levying less because you already have this giant fund balance, for example? On the flip side, the other error that we see is not accounting for that collection rate that we just talked about. And so not asking for enough for the general obligation bond. And then, of course, you're not going to receive 100%. You're going to receive 95.7% roundabout. And so that's the other piece to just keep in mind. Double check all your calculations on this one. It is an important one. All right, so that's it for resources. We're going to dive into requirements very, very quickly. As I have mentioned a couple of times, it lays out in law the object classifications that we use for expenditures and requirements, and your line items roll up to those. So each one of these are those object classifications that are in law. So in putting together your budget, you just estimate for each of those categories and you're all done. Easy, right? I do have a slide here that is talking about some of the nuances in budget law as that refresher reminder for you. You may have done this for years, and so, you're like, I know all of it, but these are places that we do see common questions. So I wanted to have it here for you in this slide. One is a reminder that for personnel services, budget law tells us that you must have an FTE, your full-time equivalent tally, by fund and by that organizational unit in terms of how it's organized, like by division or however your budget is organized. So you do need to be including that when you have personnel services lines. You also can, sometimes we see for smaller districts, listing out every single position individually. You don't have to budget down to that level. You can just aggregate all those positions into one wages line for, say, police in your general fund, right? That is okay. So if you have questions about budget organization, we are very happy to chat. Capital outlay, another one we get some questions on. What is capital outlay versus materials and services? There is not specific, say dollar amounts or time amounts to say it's got to be something, an asset that's over 5 years. There's not anything like that in law. So you can define that really for your organization, and you may already have it in your financial policies. If not, highly recommend documenting that. Debt service, very important in law. You must show separate amounts for principal and interest. You can't just have a lump sum debt service. Again, something we see quite commonly. For contingency, it's an interesting one. One, remember, it can only be in operating funds. So what does that mean? It needs to have personnel services or materials and services or capital outlay. It must have at least one of those categories to be considered an operating fund. If it does not, you cannot have contingency in that fund. So we don't want to see contingency in debt service funds, for example. And you cannot spend directly out of contingency. You need to take a budgetary action, a post-adoption budgetary action before you can spend it. And we'll talk more about that at the end when we get to post-adoption actions. Reserve for future expenditures, I think underutilized, but a great tool. This is something that you could have, for example, in a reserve fund where you are saving money for a future large equipment purpose, for example. The advantage of this over something like ending fund balance is that it is dedicated for a specific purpose. And if you need to access it earlier, even if you're saving it for future years, you can, as long as it's for the thing that you were saving for. So you can do that via supplemental budget. And then a reminder that ending fund balance is often tempting for folks. I see budget committees or maybe newer governing body members. You cannot spend it. It is part of your budget, and it needs to be an accurate part of your budget, so you're showing the full picture to the public. However, you can only spend it in terms of a public emergency, so not something to just dip into. All right, so you've done all of your fantastic estimating, you've done your resources, you've done your requirements, you've balanced that beautiful budget. Now you're going to share it with the world. That is great. So a few reminders on here on releasing the budget document. Again, minimum is detailed budget sheets and the budget message. If you have more, fantastic, not a problem, but you need that at a minimum. And you can send it to the budget committee ahead of time. That is okay. However, they cannot talk about it. They can't email about it. They cannot text about it. It really needs to be for their information only, just reading it on their own. And also, when you share it with the budget committee, you must also make it available to the general public at the same time. Just thinking of that transparency and showing your work, you can't have a special group that's getting it first. No, it needs to go to the public and the budget committee at the same time. Just post it on your website. And then you do have to make it available to the public. Hard copies if they want it. This gets less valid every single year, or I shouldn't say valid, but less used every single year. So probably not something you need to worry too much about. All right, we've got another pop quiz. So let me pull up my polls here and take a look at this. And again, this is one of those times when we're going back a couple of slides to that property tax stuff. So let's see what you remember. Let's see, where are you hiding? There we are. So we've got three options. If you remember those calculations that we had on the screen. And again, if you don't know, if you are new to this, this is okay. Go ahead and just take your best guess. And we'll all learn together. All right, we've got a pretty good response here rate here. I am seeing that most people are getting this one right. They're reading through. We've got a few who maybe were tricked by a very similar terms, but not quite the same terms, but almost everybody's got this one right. So the correct answer is B. Consumer price index absolutely can be useful when looking at your budget, but we don't need it for property taxes. For property taxes, it's calculated on the assessed value. That compression loss is that kind of maximum that is tax amount that is set in law, and the taxes can be reduced down to that. So we want to be aware of that. And then our collection rate is accounting for delinquencies, discounts, that type of thing. So B is the correct answer there. All right, good work. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to move into our approved budget. So proposed budget has been released. You've done all that great work forecasting, calculating, putting together a fantastic budget. And now it goes to your budget committee. So what does the budget committee do with this beautiful budget that you've put together? Well, whether it's the governing body only or it's your governing body plus your community members, they have the same work to do. One, they have to receive that budget document in their first official meeting, right? Another question that we often get that I should mention, is it okay for my budget committee to meet before I give them the proposed budget? Just to do a really high level informational, like, this is our budget. We have this many funds. Yes, you can absolutely do that with your budget committee. You can do a kind of general training to explain to them what their duties and roles are. That is fine. You just have to make sure that that first officially noticed meeting of the budget committee is where they receive the proposed budget document and hear that budget message. Now, they also need to take public comments. And they do not have to do that at the first meeting. They can do it at a later meeting if they want to, but you have to make sure that you are properly noticing it so that the public knows when that is happening. When can they go and talk about the budget? The budget committee also gets to change the budget however they would like. They have the power in this scenario. They also don't have to make any changes. We see plenty of budgets that are proposed and then approved as is. That's great too. There's not a right or a wrong here, but they do have the ability to make as many changes as they would like. They are also going to, very importantly, specify the maximum tax rate or levy for each fund. This is the job of the budget committee. The governing body can reduce a tax levy, but they cannot increase it or introduce a new one. So you want to make sure that your budget committee is getting this one right when they are approving it. First thing first is going to be noticing the budget committee meetings. And we've got another roadblock here because, I mean, I think Brittany will tell you this is probably one of the most frequent places where we see mistakes every year. And it's because you only do it once a year, right? And there are numerous options in how we notice. So it can get a little bit confusing. We have a cheat sheet on our website. So I've got a little screenshot of one piece of it here. So definitely go there before you send out your budget meeting notices. And again, we are happy to look things over before you submit them. And another just word to the wise that I would say, a lot of folks choose to do a newspaper as part of their notifications. Um, Deadlines can be very challenging with that, and they can change from year to year with the newspaper. So this is where that calendar becomes very handy again, just checking to make sure, well, when do I need to send the notice to the paper in advance so that they can publish it during these dates, right? It's just making sure all those pieces are on the calendar. All right, so you have four possible methods. As we mentioned, two of them include the newspaper. If you're using the newspaper, you either need to publish twice in the newspaper, or you can do once in the newspaper and once on the district website. If you're posting it on the website, there's some additional stuff that goes along with that. You need to mention that fact in your newspaper posting, and you need to have it posted on the website in what the law calls a prominent manner at least 10 days prior to the meeting, and it needs to stay up for those 10 days up until the meeting, right? So just keep that in mind as you're looking at these options. We do have some districts who still mail, and if you mail, you only send it once, but you need to make sure that you're getting it to every street address. Similar thing with hand delivery. So I have an example notice here, and a few things that are highlighted are things that are required in budget law. So one of those is saying who is meeting and what they are doing. We've got the purpose of the meeting, meeting as the budget committee. You'll notice what I had just mentioned here in blue. Notice is published on the district website, explaining where that is. So you've got that piece covered in law. And you need to tell the public how they can provide public comment. This one's now a couple years old, so you'll notice the COVID-19 references, but that's perfect, right? You're being very clear to the public. This is how you access it. This is how you come and provide testimony. And you also need to tell them how they can get a copy of the proposed budget. So you'll see that link there highlighted at the bottom. A little mention of something more recent that we have is that in 2023, There were some changes to public noticing laws allowing for online only newspapers because we were seeing more and more print newspapers go away. So there are still specific requirements and definitions of what counts as a digital newspaper. You need to have paid subscribers and that type of thing. But this really does open up a lot more channels, especially for folks who are in areas that might not have any print media left. So I've got some ORS references I can share with you if you want more detail on any of this stuff, but just know that this exists. Okay, I've got a pop quiz for you from a couple of um, slides back here. So again, as I said, notices is one of the areas where we see the most confusion. So we're going to give this one a shot here. Uh, and this information was on the slide, but which of the following are true? Notices are published on a website, must be published at least 30 days prior to the meeting. Notice published in the paper must include the website where the notice will be published. Okay. Oh, we're pretty evenly split on this one. Interesting. A lot of you are getting it right. The majority of you are getting it right in that it is only B because notices are published in the paper must include the website, just as we saw in that example. However, notices published on the website must be posted 10 days prior to the meeting, not 30 days prior. So I was a little tricky with our language there, but I wanted to mention it because this is a really common error that we see. The newspaper notice can be 5 to 30 days ahead of time, but the website notice needs to be 10 days prior. So another number to throw in there. And again, this is why there's so many questions because yeah, it is not super straightforward. So just your reminder to really check your noticing process and make sure you've got all the pieces in there. All right, great work, everybody. Okay, so next we're going to move into what is going to come out of the budget committee. They're hearing this proposed budget information, they're discussing it, they're doing their public comment. You, as staff members, one of the most important things you can do is make sure this is all documented because you need to prove to the public, to TSCC, to Department of Revenue, if they ask, to your auditors, that you did all these legally required processes. So you need to make sure that decisions are documented in meeting notes, that you have resolutions showing that these things happened. So very important piece. You've got to do the good work, and then we've got to show our work. We've got to document that it's all done. Another roadblock item to mention here is quorum. This is only an issue if you don't have all your folks showing up, but that can certainly happen. So just a reminder that in order to take action, you do need to have the majority of your budget committee in place. And if you are someone who has community members on your budget committee, it just gets slightly more complicated. The really short answer, as shown in this slide, is that if you do not have the full amount of community members, they do not count towards the total. You basically have a new total budget committee number. However, if you have vacancies on your governing body, those do still count towards a total budget committee quorum. So confused yet? If so, that's okay. Let's talk it through. But I wanted you to just have in the back of your mind, if you find yourself in the situation, there's some laws around quorum stuff. All right, so let's see, how are we doing on time? Great, so we are coming up on 11. We're gonna do a very short little breakout. This is gonna be about 5 minutes. In our in-person, we really like to give the opportunity for networking. That's something we've heard is so useful. So what I'm gonna do is put you in these breakout rooms for maybe 5 minutes, maybe not even quite that long, and just give you a chance to introduce yourself. So hopefully you can meet somebody new. And if it's not somebody new, please share one thing that you've learned about budget law this year. It can be today, it can be 6 months ago. Hey, it can be anytime. But if you just want to share one little thing that you're like, I didn't know it worked like that. I think that's just a nice chance for us to connect with our colleagues because this really is something where we all get through it together. So I'm going to go ahead and put you in the breakout rooms, and then I will send you a note when you're going to come back in. Welcome back, folks. I have just a few more seconds for our last people to jump back in. Okay, great. Got everybody back in again. Hopefully you had time to mostly go around for introductions with an hour and a half. It is a challenge, but my hope is that you at least saw a new friendly face. And budget law it applies the same with a few exceptions here and there to all of us. So even if it's someone from a school district and you're from a city, there's value in those connections and looking at how we are doing our budgets and communicating back to the public. All right. And yeah, it's just nice to have a break from sitting and, interacting versus just absorbing the whole time. So thank you all for participating. All right, so jumping back in, we only have a half hour left. Can you believe it? Time is flying by. So we're going to get through our last couple of phases of the budget here. TSCC certification. So this process for our districts varies a little bit, whether if you are a small district or a large district. For small districts, we review your budget, we look at it for budget law compliance, we make our objections and recommendations, we send you a certification letter, and then you hold your own budget hearing. Your governing body gets together, hears from the public on that approved budget. Now, for large districts, similar process, except that TSCC, our commissioners come and meet with your governing body. And the reason for that is that you don't have community members as part of your budget committee, right? And so the TSCC commissioners are acting as representatives of the public. They are the chance to come in and have that conversation about what's in the budget, about policy decisions, understanding the financial world of the organization. So they do that public hearing and then they certify the budget and then budget adoption happens. So we're going to go through this pretty fast because we have a lot of other content to cover. But we do, as we're doing our approved budget review, we're really focusing on that budget law compliance. And then we have a recommendation or objection if needed. So you can think of it as a little bit as a kind of budget law specific audit in a way. So if we see something that is being done incorrectly or could be improved, we may give you a recommendation. Or if it's something like incorrectly calculated property taxes, that's the most common area where we might see an objection, then that would go into our certification letter as well. We're always going to communicate with you quite a bit when we see anything. So this isn't going to be coming out of the blue. We'll tell you what we're seeing. We'll talk about ways to remedy it. All right, so we're going to try this out for the first time in this format. This is our Be a TSCC Commissioner slide. So for this portion, I am okay if you want to unmute and just sort of yell out something if you see it, or you can put it in the chat. But there are three budget errors in this. So if we just want to take a real quick minute, and if anybody sees anything to say, oh, if I was a TSC Commissioner, I would be asking questions about this because this seems contrary to budget law. So you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and share.
Looks like total resources and requirements don't match in the general fund.
Yes, yes, you're so fast. That is exactly right. And that's absolutely something we would ask a question about. And that's something our commissioners would ask a question about. Because if we remember from one of our earlier slides, resources and requirements must balance for every fund. Anything else that anybody sees there? Oh, yes, contingency and debt fund. I see that in the chat. That is absolutely right. Just a reminder, does it have any operating classifications in it? Do we see personnel services, materials and services, or capital outlay? We do not, so it cannot have contingency. Great work. There's one more, and this one's like a little bit more nuanced. So does anybody see something that they want to yell out? Okay, hearing none, I will share. So the last one is that our ending fund balance for our debt service fund is really high, right? So we were talking about this. They only need $100,000 to pay their debt service. How are they justifying having multiple years of debt service payments sitting right here? So that is something that would flag a question from a TSCC commissioner to being like, hey, that's taxpayer money that's just sitting there. Why are they not levying a lower tax rate so they're not just been building this excessive fund balance? So, all right, great work, everybody. Appreciate you participating in that. Okay, so that's it for TSCC certification. We do, again, I'm going to plug our website multiple times. We do have a budget submission page that shows you all the details of how to submit your budget to us, what pieces of the approved budget are required, things like meeting minutes, summary documents. So please take a look at that if you're newer to this process or just want a quick refresher. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the adopted budget. So we've done all of these phases. Little green car is moving along to budget adoption. We're almost there. We're so close. So getting to budget adoption, again, we just have a small number of things that we need to do to make this happen. One of the first is more noticing. Remember, our transparency is a key tenet of what we do here with budget law. So you're going to put together a financial summary that then is published for the public to view. And it looks a little bit different depending if you're a large TSCC member district or not. But there is a form for the majority of folks for all our smaller districts that you can use from Department of Revenue. You do need to do it 5 to 30 days before the budget hearing. And guess what? You only need to do it once. TSCC does have another helpful little cheat sheet. It's just a page that talks about what is required for the noticing and how to do that noticing. So please check out our website for that. Public hearing, we're going to have another one. The public got to come and talk to the budget committee about what they thought about the proposed budget. Now they get to come talk about the approved budget and tell the governing body what they think should be the different or what they like. And then the governing body also gets to make changes. However, there is a limit to that. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but the quick version is that if they want to change expenditures by more than 10% in any fund, or if they want to raise the tax limit, they can do that, but they have to go through this whole process a second time with the publication and the hearing. All right, and very importantly, you're going to have a budget resolution to adopt that budget. I have one more short little video for us here that's just talking about the public comment piece.
That would hurt them the most. That's the one that would sting. And it is important to note here, in theory and often in practice, having small entities with a single purpose can be a great idea. Take Litchfield, New Hampshire. In 2007, they chose to create a mosquito control district to, you know, control mosquitoes. It's run by two men who, as you will see from an amazing YouTube video of one of their public meetings, are almost heartbreakingly conscientious, regardless of the fact that there is no one else in the room.
Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chair will call the roll. Acting Vice Chair, Mr. Raccio.
Present.
And I'm here. All members are present.
Come on! You have got to admire their dedication to the rules. These two men are so scrupulous, they would sit at a broken red traffic light for 6 hours in the middle of the night. Red is red, we live in a civilized society. Red is red, we stay. In fact, they ran that 43-minute meeting so meticulously, they even took input from the public with predictable results.
Any members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing and hearing none?
Okay, so the reason that I like to show this video at most trainings is because, well, one, it makes something that can sometimes be a little bit dull, a little bit more amusing, but also because it shows such a key principle of what we are doing with our public comment. Even if there is no one in the room, we are holding a place for it on our agenda. We're communicating to the public that this is when they can come and speak. We're making sure that that opportunity is there. And yes, absolutely, even if there's no one there, say now is the time for public comment. Is there anyone online? Is there anyone that, we don't see who is there? Because you just don't know. And we have seen this happen more online, but we have had folks forget to ask for public comment. And there was someone sitting in the video call who wanted to provide, public comment, and they're trying to, frantically raise their hand on Zoom and, show that they're there. So yeah, just a reminder, even if you do not typically have members of the public attend, make sure you hold that space and you show on your agenda, yes, we did allow for public comment. We had the opportunity there. I will say too, we are seeing more public comment than we've ever seen before, especially in the last year. And that's for us as TSCC, but I would imagine that's coming to quite a few of your districts as well. The public is, more involved than they have ever been here in our local area. And they are quite interested in how property taxes are being spent and taxation fees, all of that. So just a reminder to do that work. All right, we've got another roadblock here. speaking again to public meetings. And one of the pieces here is that in 2022, there's a requirement to make meetings accessible remotely whenever possible. And so that may look like a Zoom meeting, or that can even be a conference call. We have some districts that are small enough that their board meets in someone's living room because they don't have a physical spot, and they'll do a conference call. So that way, anyone in the district who wants to call in, has mobility issues or anything like that, has that opportunity. And that's great. And then just like with our budget committee, you need to make sure you have the majority of your total governing board there, and the majority have to vote in the affirmative to move something forward, whether they're there or not. All right, so I promised we would talk about this a little bit more. So this is our other roadblock. The governing body may not increase expenditures in any fund by more than 10%. We have a nice little reminder, what are our expenditures versus our non-expenditures? The reason I am talking about this so much in this training, it is one of our most commonly asked questions. So sharing with all of you. And then the governing body may not increase the property tax levy. They may, however, decrease it from what the budget committee said. So just a little interesting nuance there if that ends up coming. And of course, we have our asterisks here. So what is our asterisk saying? It is saying that if for some reason the board does need to make a change of that scale, well, they still can, but they have to publish another financial summary because they're making a large enough change that the public needs to know that it's happening, right? So publish a new financial summary. TSCC needs to review it again because it's like you're reapproving your budget. And then you have to schedule and notice a new second budget hearing. So going back to our budget calendar again, you can see where if you're at the end of the year, it can be quite tricky to fit this in, right? So you want to give yourself enough room in your budget calendar that if something like this were to happen, you've got the flexibility. You've got to remember you need sufficient time for noticing that 5 to 30 days of doing the new financial summary and noticing the new hearing. So it definitely can be a time chunk and is an argument for adopting a little earlier if you can. Okay, let's see. Oh, I just saw a question on does this happen often? I would not say often, but we have seen this happen. And in fact, for large districts, because we hold the budget hearing, TSCC has held 2 hearings in 1 year at the end of the year because this was actually the one that I'm most aware of. It was during COVID. And so there was a huge influx of federal funds. But you know what? The district knew about it, and they knew about it before budget adoption. So they needed to go ahead and put it in their budget. And that's what they did. And they held the 2 hearings and they did the publications, did everything right. The second TSCC hearing was much shorter because there were not there were big dollar amount changes, but not big policy changes. So yeah, a great question. It does happen. But I would not say often. All right. So the resolution, we talked about this is another really key effort of what our governing body is doing in this adopted budget phase. What does it do? Budget law tells us what it needs to do. We're adopting the budget, making appropriations, and levying and categorizing taxes. We've got an example here. I will say, because this is a refresher, our short version, we're not able to get into too much detail here. However, also, this is another area where we see so many errors every year. It's at the end of the process, and we don't officially review the adopted budget. Our role is looking at the approved, right? However, you do legally need to send all of us your adopted budgets, whether you're a TSCC member or not. So we are looking at them, and we do reach out to you typically if we see something that just looks a little off. So my recommendation to you is just double, triple, quadruple check this document. And I think it is worthwhile in looking at some other taxing districts to see how they're doing their resolution. Is there something that maybe is off about yours or could be better organized? Again, TSCC is very happy to take a look at that as well. If you want us to look at last year's and say, hey, did you see anything weird? Could we be doing this better? We'd be happy to chat with you about that. All right, I have this as just another resource. We're not going to talk about it a lot. We're not going into detail of how budget resolutions are to be organized, but it is really specific in budget law. The high level version is that you can combine your operating expenditures, that personnel services, materials and services, and capital outlay, into an organizational unit or program and activity. You don't have to list each one of those categories out in your budget resolution. So if you have more questions, let's talk about it offline. All right, so the adopted budget document, this is your chance to show everyone you did all the pieces. You did all the legal steps that need to happen. So you are going to pull together all of this information showing your budget message, those proposed budget pieces, the fact that, you then had the resolution that actually did adoption, your minutes, resolutions, all that great stuff. You send it to TSCC. If you were in not Multnomah County, you would send it to your county clerk. Multnomah County does not have a county clerk. We serve that function. So you're going to send all of your budgets to us. That is due by July 15th. And for most of you, you're going to have it by then. You may have a circumstance where you need a little bit more time, and that's okay. Just talk to us and we can extend that deadline out to September 30th. That's our kind of final date. However, you usually are going to have your budget numbers. You can at least get those to us and we can get started on those pieces and reviewing that. Okay, so post-adoption, how are we doing on our time? Whew, 15 minutes, okay. This is always such a whirlwind going through this. So post-adoption changes, we're going to, again, this could be a 2-hour class easily. I encourage you to look at our resources on our website, and also Department of Revenue has a training on this as well, because another area, we get lots and lots of questions. So you've done your beautiful budget, you've had it adopted, you're feeling so good. 3 months later, something new happened, something you did not know about. What are you going to do? Well, thankfully, local budget law does give us ways to make changes when something unexpected happens. You've done your best with the information you had to create your budget. New information can become available, and that's okay. You can make changes. The changes do come with certain actions that you need to take. They are all actions that are done by resolution and have different levels of public involvement. So a good way to think about it in your head is the larger the financial change, the more likely you're going to have to do some sort of noticing. A supplemental budget and a supplemental budget with hearing both require publication in the newspaper. And a supplemental budget with hearing is just like it sounds like you're going to have a dedicated gavel in hearing on that particular supplemental budget to do that. So a roadblock that we see quite frequently is people may have scheduled times they do a supplemental budget, right? A couple times a year. There's nothing wrong with that, having that scheduled. However, you need to make sure that you are making your changes before you spend the dollars. You cannot suddenly get some new grant money, spend that grant, and then at the end of the year, true up your budget to match what you actually did. It needs to happen ahead of time. So just a key thing to remember. So what does that mean? That means really carefully looking at your spending on at least a monthly basis and checking against that budget resolution. Those are your legal spending categories. Are you in any way accidentally going over that or getting close? You might need to do your supplemental budget out of your normal schedule if that's the case. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit more about post-adoption changes, and then I have some opportunities for you to try it yourself. So post-adoption changes, we basically have 4 different methods that we can use by resolution, and it's in law in terms of which one to use for which scenario. So an appropriation resolution might be something where you get money, but it's only for one specific thing. You can't spend it on anything else. So it doesn't require the publication in the newspaper. You pass it like any other resolution your governing body would do, because there's only one way to spend the money. A transfer resolution would be where you're not increasing the overall expenditures in your budget overall, right? You are instead moving money within the same fund, maybe from an appropriation category to another one, or between 2 funds, right? So this is where contingency falls if it's under a certain dollar amount. Contingency up to 15% of appropriations throughout the year can be done through transfer resolution. After that, it's got to be supplemental budget. Supplemental budget is if you get some new revenue, hooray, but there's not something that you have to spend it on. You have choices, right? And that's where, okay, we need to notify the public about this money so they have the chance to weigh in. And then supplemental budget with a hearing, that's our highest, most involved category here, because that's when you hold that hearing as well. This is when you are increasing fund expenditures by more than 10%. So we're talking about bigger dollar circumstances, most likely. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up our scenarios here. So I've got scenario 1, take your best guess. And again, if you're one of our folks who has, oh, it's not letting me do it. Okay. I think when I did my test, I might have done scenario 1, and so now it's not letting me launch it again. So we'll do scenario 2. Let's see. Oh, it's not letting me do any of that. Let's see. All right, it's not letting me do any of them, so I'm gonna try this really quick edit and see if that gives us more options here. It does not. Oh, okay. So this is new for me. I'm not sure what happened. Like I said, I did go through and do some trials on them. And so it's saying the poll has been launched in this meeting and it's not letting me do it. All right. Well, I'm going to read you one and we won't do all of them. And then if somebody wants to put in the chat or yell out what you think that it is. Okay. So congratulations, you've received a new and unexpected general purpose grant from the state. It will increase your expenditures by 9% in your special revenue fund, and you're allowed to spend it however you need. How do you increase your appropriations so that you can spend the grant funds? Does anybody have a guess on that? So we've got it's a new general purpose grant. We can spend it on whatever we want. However, it's not over 9% of expenditures in our fund. How do you make sure you increase those appropriations to legally spend that? Okay, I see an answer supplemental budget, and that is exactly correct. We do not have to do the supplemental budget with hearing because it's not over the 10% of expenditures. However, because it's a general purpose, there's not one thing that we can spend it on. We could choose how we're going to spend it. It could be different programs. So it is, in fact, going to be our supplemental budget. All right, great work on that. Okay, so let's see. I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and finish out our slides. And I think rather than doing more of those, since we've only got the 10 minutes left, and that way we have a little bit of time for questions. Okay, so I wanted to show you that we do have some resources around this because, again, these are not things that we are doing all the time. So it's really easy to forget what exactly. And we put this together actually at request of one of our districts saying, I get so many questions about why do we have to do a supplemental budget here and we don't have to do it here. We're doing a different kind of resolution. So we just have this on one page on our training site that's showing, okay, when you're doing budget adoption and your governing body is limited to 10%, what does that look like? What is the limit and what do I need to do if we're going to exceed that limit? So in this case, it's the republication of the approved budget and then another public hearing, right? Now, if we're doing what we just talked about here, where it's going to be a supplemental budget because it's over that 10% of expenditures, that means that and again, we list out exactly what expenditures are here. You've got that definition available for you versus when we're looking at contingency, when you actually look at appropriations for contingency. We're used to thinking in terms of expenditures, but for contingency, they want to know the overall appropriations for that fund, and that's what you use for the calculation. And you calculate it cumulatively over the year, which is not true for a supplemental budget. So yeah, just one of those things where it's like, you may not memorize it immediately, even after doing this for many years. So please make use of our references. Okay, there's my scenarios, which are not launching. So sorry about that. We'll go on to, I'm going to show you just a few more resources in this area. So we have a whole supplemental budget quick guide. So if you're going to be doing a supplement, or you think you might be doing a supplemental budget, take a look at this. We even have some examples of the resolution language to use for supplemental budgets, because if it's not something you do very often, you might not be sure, or you might want to just check and make sure that your resolution is covering things correctly, because budget law does tell us specific information that needs to be included in those resolutions and when you're doing the publication for supplemental budget. We also have a FAQ on unappropriated fund balance, and this is really a little bit more for the public, budget committee, and governing body. Most of you on this call are quite familiar with those limits. Other folks sometimes are not, and really want to point at grabbing some of that money. So this is helping talking about when legally can you touch that, what constitutes a public emergency, and what process needs to be followed if that money were to be spent in a public emergency. So take a look about those. And then we have a flow chart too, which I know this is tiny, so you can blow up the PDF when you get it off of our website. But this talks about a number of different, transfer resolution, the appropriation resolution that we talked about. Some of the most common scenarios are here. So that can help guide you in choosing, well, do I really need to do a supplemental or not? It's like, oh, no, I'm just transferring money from one fund to another fund, not increasing overall expenditures. I get to do a transfer resolution. Okay, another roadblock, common errors that we see are around contingency. I think this is because it's just a little bit different, right? Contingency is special. All the other changes that we're looking at are tied to expenditures. With contingency, we are looking at our limits based on appropriations. So again, we made a couple of resource slides for you, just a little quick helper for you. How to transfer contingency, in what way are you doing that? And then how to calculate contingency. So you can take a look at this example and make sure that that's matching what you're doing as you're calculating yours. All right, so I have this as a reminder to us. We're going to go into Q&A next, general questions and answers, and then we have some questions if no one has a pressing question that are common ones to go through. And so we're going to go ahead and put the survey link into the chat right now so that there, oh, I hadn't put that in. So if you do need to jump off, I know if you've got, hopefully you don't have a meeting right at 11:30, but maybe you do, please at least take a click on this link so that you can provide us feedback. We really listen to what we receive and try to make these trainings as useful as possible. So love to hear your feedback. And I just now saw that we had a comment from Amanda. Sorry, I missed that earlier. If it's just safer to hold a supplemental budget each time, you could certainly do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And I have some districts who say it's not technically required to do a supplemental budget with a hearing, but we already have to notice it anyway. So we might as well just give the public all the chances to discuss it. So there isn't anything wrong with going above and beyond if that is the process that your district would like to follow, or that is your policy. Again, we're showing you what is required in budget law. Never hurts to do more communication or more transparency. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move into Q&A now. First, so we have 4 minutes left, and like I said, I have a couple of questions that we can go through that are common ones we get throughout the year. But before that, for those of you who are here, does anybody have a pressing question that you're really hoping we're going to talk about and we didn't? If so, you can either unmute or you can put it in the chat. I'd be happy to hear from you.
Allegra,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit more about intra-fund transfers and why you would need to do a transfer resolution if you've only got one fund?
Yeah. So if you only have one fund, depending how your resolution is written, you may very well still need to transfer spending authority from one place to another. So let's take an example. Let's say that you have a general fund and you have, well, one example is contingency, actually, right? We can't spend directly out of contingency. So if you need to access contingency, you're going to be doing that transfer resolution to move money within your fund, within your general fund, from contingency up to, let's say, water preservation services or whatever that organizational category appropriation spending limit in your general fund is. So yeah, that's one example that comes to mind. Or if you have multiple categories, let's say you have multiple departments that are listed in your general fund. Maybe you've got an administration department and then you have a water services department, and you wanted to move money because you're not going to hire a new water tech. It has come to your attention you need a new communications person. Well, then you would go ahead and do the transfer resolution to transfer the money from that water services into the administration spending limit. So great question.
Okay. But if you just have our general fund is just listed as like water services, I believe. Mm-hmm. And if I wanted to, like, say we went over on capital outlay, mm-hmm. and we wanted to just transfer funds from personnel because we'd overestimated that, does that require a transfer resolution?
In that case, no. In your case, it would only be if you were moving from contingency because it's looking at your budget resolution. What are the spending limits in your resolution? So in that case, if your personnel and services and capital outlay are rolled up together and water services, which is completely permissible, then you can spend within those categories. That said, just kind of to Amanda's point, if you have a governing body that just really wants to be very aware of everything, you could do a transfer resolution. It's not legally necessary, but maybe you would do like a presentation to them to say, hey, we're changing this internally in our budget, but we don't have to change our legal spending limits because we're under that limit, regardless of whether we spend it here or over here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so we only have 1 minute left. I'm just going to show you these other common questions. Again, the questions and the answers are both included here, so I don't think there's something that we need to talk through. They are on your slideshow that you received, and we will be putting this slideshow up onto our training page, so you're able to access it there as well if you need it for reference. We just have questions around, how we are able to fix things when we find mistakes, because we're all human. That happens every year, right? So try to find as much stuff as you can in your proposed, because it's easier to change between proposed and approved, but you do have options for making corrections. And of course, if you are making the correction in an adopted budget, you do need to keep in mind that 10% and property tax levy rule. Public notice, as I said, we started to put in more frequently asked questions because this is such a point of confusion. So we've got the ORS right in there for you. Here we're talking about when you need to move information from one fund to another fund, right? How do we do that? Do we need a supplemental budget? As we just talked about, no, we can do it via resolution. And if you are changing it more than 10% in between two funds, but you're not increasing the overall budget expenditures, you still can use a transfer resolution rather than a supplemental budget. Unless you want to be on the safer side like Amanda and just hold it just in case, that's okay too. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up because we are at our 11:30. So appreciate having you all here today. Just so much fun to talk about budget law. I'm glad to have you. Brittany and I'll stay on for a couple of minutes. So if anyone has any additional questions they would like to ask, we are absolutely happy to hear it. And don't forget about the survey. Please click on the link. Brittany will send it out to you with your certificate as well. But we do love to hear from you. Nice things are welcome as well.
Yes. I think we have a hand raised.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, just real quickly, I wanted to confirm you would send out the updated slides at some point, or were those posted in the chat?
They were not posted in the chat. Yes, we're going to post them to our website. And
Okay.
actually, maybe Brittany, we could send them out with the certificate too. So just that folks have them. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Yeah.